Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today I'm going to share with you 8 duologies. A duology is my sweet spot. If it's 2 books in a series, just 1, 2, that's it. That seems doable. Once we start getting to like the 3, 4, 5 book series, it gets a little bit more daunting, but there's nothing better than when you read a powerhouse duology, and do I have some recommendations for you today. I'm going to try to keep this less of a review and more of just a presentation of all of these duologies, and you should decide if you want to read them or not. I have 1 romance option, a few YA options, and a few romantasy options, so let's get into it. Let's start with the only romance option that I have for you, and that's The Confidence of Wildflowers duology. The first book, The Confidence of Wildflowers. The second book, The Resurrection of Wildflowers. I love this duology in the way that it represents life in general, and this is a good representation of when you meet someone that you want to be with, you are meant to be with, that it doesn't always happen instantly, that there are some things that life throws in the way, major curveballs that no one could have ever seen coming, and the way that you navigate that. It's such a beautiful story. I cried in both books. It is a duology, but there is also a novella that goes along with it. So after you finish The Resurrection of Wildflowers, if you want more of them, this is what this is, The Endurance of Wildflowers. It's a short, quick read. As the way that the duology ends, it leaves you wanting more from the characters and just wanting to make sure that they're okay and they're outliving their happily ever after, and that's what this little novella fills in. Not necessary, but definitely cute. There's a pretty heavy trigger warning in this book, and it's child loss. I think it is done in a way that is real and that is gut-wrenching and raw and super emotional and very impactful. This is one of my favorite duologies. Moving on to our YA options, so we're going to start with Divine Rivals and Ruthless Vows. Divine Rivals has all of the hype on Book Talk, and I believe it's well deserved. It's a YA fantasy that revolves around 2 journalists who are journaling about an active war that is happening between 2 ancient gods. It's not super heavy in the fantasy, so I think this would be a good beginner duology if you are like wanting to dip your toes into fantasy but you're not quite sure. It does revolve around the war and the 2 gods, but it's not thick on that world building aspects that sometimes can get overwhelming in a fantasy book. This duology has the most ooey gooey delicious romance in it as well, and I think it's a good balance between plot and the romance. Roman and Iris are my Roman Empire. I definitely think it's worth the read. Again, it's just a duology, just these 2 books, that's all we get. Sometimes it's a bad thing because whenever you read a duology you're like, oh wait, it's just 2 books, this is all we get, and I miss them and I hope that they're okay. The Shepherd King duology, the first book is One Dark Window, the second book is Two Twisted Crowns. This, in my opinion, is a god tier duology. This is a gothic fantasy, just meaning that it has a bit more of like a gloomy, eerie vibe to it. Think of like a misty forest that you've never been to and it's like 6 p.m. and it's kind of getting like a little spooky. That's like the vibes. This duology does have a little bit more world building to it. One Dark Window does start off a little slow and it is kind of questionable in the beginning. You're not quite sure if you're going to like it, but it picks up in the end, I promise. And the second book, this is how you finish a duology. I love Two Twisted Crowns. Storyline is about a sickness that has infiltrated a kingdom, and I say sickness because it's really a sickness that leaves you with magical powers. The king was threatened by this, so he purged anyone who had the sickness and was granted any kind of magical powers because he wanted to stay in control, until there's one person who realizes that this isn't a way to live and they have to go on a journey and a quest to change this. And girl, there's a fucking spider. Ah! Go. Oh my god, where is it? Where'd it go? Oh, there it is. Okay, Moving on to The Six of Crows. The first book is Six of Crows. The second book is Crooked Kingdom. This duology is about 6 people who are kind of outcast in their society who band together to go on this quest or a heist, you could say. Not only are they going on a heist, but they also find something else that is happening behind the scenes that could really mess up their world as they know it. So these 6 young misfits have to figure out a way to stop that from happening. One thing that I love about this duology is the relationship between the characters and how diverse each character is, and the banter between them, and the friendship and the way that they just make it happen. Next is a duology for all my witchy girls. This is the Witch and Hunter duology. The first book is Night of the Witch. The second book is A Fate of Magic. This book isn't actually out yet. It comes out October 1st. I was lucky enough to get an ARC, and let me tell you, I'm so happy about it. This is a YA historical fantasy that revolves around witches and hunters, and it's a historical fantasy, but it's not super heavy on that historical aspect. I know sometimes when people say historical fantasy, that can be like, oh, I don't want to read nonfiction. It's not like that. It's just the way the story is told. Sometimes you can tell that it has been influenced by certain points of history. I believe, if I remember correctly, in which I have faith in myself, that this takes place in Germany, so it has some German influences to it. Now, earlier I said that One Dark Window was eerie and gloomy. Nothing compares to this duology. Some of the most eerie things I have ever read in a book happened in this book, and it's YA. About witches who are being purged from society, and you have a witch who is pretty much living in secret, and she comes into contact with a witch hunter who has alternative motives. There's secrets, there's lies, there's hidden truths, and it's so damn good. It's also, can we have a moment for the cover? It's just absolutely gorgeous and one of my favorite covers ever. Next we have a romantasy option, and that is the Vincula Realm duology. Now listen, I have talked about this duology before over on my TikTok, and I didn't realize that I was absolutely butchering the names of these books. So this is the first book, The Umbra King. I used to say The Umbria King. Girl, excuse me, why are you doing that? And then we have the second book, which is Altrina. I'm pretty sure I'm saying that right, but I was so confident that I was saying it right before. This is a duology that is about a serial killing female who is known as the Butcher and is killing in the name of vengeance until she gets caught and is sent to the world's most scariest place, which is, you know, essentially prison, and she meets the ruler of the prison, who is supposed to be like the most scariest, don't mess with him person ever, but she is just so badass and she just simply doesn't care. So the storyline does revolve around vengeance for the main female character, and the main male character knows who she's going after and doesn't want that to happen because he wants to go after him first, because he has his own vendetta against this person. Why are they barking? I didn't want to stop talking because I was on a roll and I didn't want to mess it up. I think the quote on the back of the first book really does it justice. It says, the morally gray don't want redemption, they want retribution. Friendships, the banter, the tension, the storyline, the plot itself, this duology is fantastic. Also, we love a book that has a pronunciation guide at the beginning of the book, which is kind of cruel now that I look at it, the way I've been butchering these names. It also comes with a world building guide, but don't let that be something that is kind of overwhelming. You don't really need it because the way that the writing is, it explains everything pretty well, and I find it very easy to follow along with. But if you ever forget what one thing is, you can flip forward to the beginning of the book and just kind of refresh your memory, so that's a plus. The next duology is the Dance of Thieves duology. The first book is Dance of Thieves. The second book is The Vow of Thieves. It's been a while since I've read this duology, and if I'm completely honest, I did end up DNFing Vow of Thieves, but that is just me. I think it was just when I read it. I started to read this book after I finished The Throne of Glass, which I don't think you should jump into another fantasy series after you finish a giant million-long book series. So that's my bad. I'll read you the little snippet at the beginning of Dance of Thieves because I think it really summarizes the story perfectly without giving anything away. It says, a formidable outlaw family that claims to be the first among nations, a son destined to lead, thrust suddenly into power. 3 fierce young women of the Queen's Premier Guard, a legendary street thief leading a mission determined to prove herself, a dark secret that is a threat to the entire continent. When outlaw leader meets reformed thief, a cat and mouse of false moves ensues, bringing them immediately together in a battle that may cost them their lives and their hearts. Remember when I read this, it's like you have a kingdom that is very much so set in its ways, almost in a way that is kind of bad, a way that, you know, it's time for things to change, but whenever you're set in your ways, it's hard to do that without some serious provoking. And I think this is a duology that I might revisit soon, because now that I'm like holding it in my hands, like feeling the book, I'm like, maybe I should give it another chance. The trilogy that comes before this duology that people said it's beneficial to read first. I didn't know that when I read it. My main complaint throughout this duology is that there were some moments that I was just confused and I didn't feel connected to the storyline, and people were like, well, did you read the Remnant Chronicles? And I was like, no, what's that? And they were like, well, that's probably why. So keep that in mind. My sister read these two just as the duology and she enjoyed it, and she didn't know that there was a previous trilogy to read first, but you know, don't say I didn't tell you, you know. Those are all the duologies I have for you today. If you know of more duologies, please comment them down below, because a duology, again, is my sweet spot. I will read a duology every time. I hope wherever you are living, it's not 1,000,000 degrees outside. It is 1,000,000 degrees outside here in Louisiana. It's like that time of year where it's like unbearable to go outside. It literally feels like you're walking in a sauna every time you go outside. My thoughts and prayers are for anyone who has to work out in this heat, because Lord knows I could not do that. That's all I have for you today. Okay, bye. Love you.